Well, welcome and thank you for joining me. This is Dr. Jason W. Morrison, theologist, New South Wales, Australia, and we have come to the end of the Watchtower Study Edition for November 2019 and our theological audits on the articles in that study edition, which unfortunately failed miserably for the Watchtower theologically. As does this final, what looks to be like an extra, I don't know how they work all this out, but they've got a little extra article at the end of the study articles, which is called or entitled, Did You Know? Now, I would have liked to have expected more from a religious organization that is as big as this, but unfortunately they've failed terribly. I did look over this one just out of curiosity to see if it was worth doing, and I'm doing it because it's an absolute miserable fail on the part of the Watchtower. And I'm at the point where I'm thinking to myself, I do check myself, am I just looking for things to fault this organization on? Am I just deliberately setting out to find things in a critical, unfair way to theologically disqualify the teachings of the Jehovah Witnesses under the Watchtower and other magazine publications? But the actual fact of the matter is the Jehovah Witness cult will not relinquish its lies. It's determined to keep its lies. It doesn't want to change its theological lies. It wants to pursue these untruths and deceptions and are not in any way taking duty of care towards the people that are in this or following this or listening to this organization. There's no theological duty of care. Now, I know many of you haven't heard this kind of language before, but theological abuse is a real, horrible and evil form of, what could I say? How would you describe? The word destruction comes to mind. Spiritual destruction, the undermining of one's spiritual integrity, to have somebody think that what they believe is right when everybody else that doesn't believe in it and has done their research correctly knows it's wrong. It's a sad, very sad state of affairs. And it's a real sad situation. This article that we're going to read now, or this extra piece of this Watchtower, is really a horrible, tragic way to end a series of theological abusive articles. Now let's start. They're asking the question, did you know? Right, now this isn't uncommon, just thinking about it. Romans 6 starts with a question similar to this. What shall we say then? Or what? It's a question, isn't it? What then? Or did you know? Or what's the outcome? Or what should we do? Did you know? Well, let's ask the question. Did you know? Do you know? What role did stewards play in the Bible? In Bible times, a steward managed the household or property of another person. Now, immediately, you get the feeling of where this is headed. The Hebrew and Greek words translated steward sometimes referred to an overseer or a household manager. We have the example of Joseph. We have an example from Jesus' day. Who was qualified for the position of a steward, they ask. The first century Roman writer Col U Mela. Now I want to find this person. I want to find this Col. I don't know who. I've never heard this before. I'm not all that interested in it, but columella is the bridge of tissue that separates the nostrils at the base, nasal base. That's a physical. Here's the columella we're after. It was a Roman writer, and we don't get much on him, do we? Part of the order is okay. So all we can find out at the moment is that columella was a Roman writer. There's not much more that we can find out about him. So let's just go with this. Advise that a slave who was appointed as an overseer or a steward should be one who had been tested by experience. Oh my goodness. Now this is a really let's hang ourselves statement. I'm going to put this quote in from columella and see what we can find. We're only going to find it in the Watchtower publications, and it's this one in particular. Did you know? I just want to take. There was. Okay, yeah, no. So yeah, this is the only place we're going to find it in this this particular article. So they're basing the qualification off what columella said is evidence of a qualified steward. Now, a slave who was appointed as an overseer or a steward should be one who had been tested by experience. Now, if we put, look, in all honesty, come on, talk about a hang yourself comment. If you test the Jehovah Witnesses' doctrines, they don't stand up to anything. The experience of those who have theologically tested the Watchtower's teachings over this century, and might I remind you, it's only been around for just over a century, they have failed time after time after time. And here, this is the mind-boggling control that these people are able to manipulate their followers with. One who had been tested by experience. If you test, really, I'm not being partial in any way whatsoever. I'm trying to be a neutral auditor, theological auditor. But if you test the Watchtower's teachings, they fail miserably, time and time again. And they've done that to themselves. The only people to blame for that is themselves. If I type in Watchtower deceptions, right? Plural. We'll get video after video after video after video, which isn't made up, which isn't trying to be biased, which isn't trying to set out to unjustly incriminate an organization. The findings are based on Watchtower writings, the fallacy of the Watchtower writings, and the failures of them to be theologically integral. Now, here's a video. It's a John Cedars, Lloyd Evans, absolutely brilliant presenter, where the Jehovah Witness Watchtower internal group is trying to convince, it's obviously aware that the followers do watch some of these videos by people that have left. They're trying to convince the people that are in it that the Watchtower is telling the truth and that everybody else is lying. But there's video after video after video that without doubt shows the Watchtower mistruths, lies, and deceptions. Now this lady here, Susan Gaskin, she is absolutely brilliant. I'm going to, you know what? I'm going to run this video of Susan's. I'm going to replay it. Might bring some light back out. But she's talking about J.W. Org's lies, misquotes, and deceptions. Enjoy this video. I'll come back. We'll finish this in another session. Thank you for joining me. This is Dr. Jason W. Morrison, theologist, doing a theological audit on what looks to be an extra little part of the end of the November Watchtower study edition for 2019, but it's a miserable, horrible, talk about shoot yourself in the foot theologically article. They're saying a good steward is one who has been tested by experience. Thank you for joining me. Enjoy Susan's video, and bye for now.
Hello, and welcome to the show. Hey, that runs. We got a nice big crowd here today. It's great to be able to do this show for you because it's a very interesting one. It's about the lies, the misquotes, and the deception that has been going on in J.W. Org. Yes, I know it sounds shocking when I say that, and it even shocks me when I say it. But when you see the mountain of evidence, I think you're going to be really, really, taken aback. So let's just get on with things, and I want to show you what I have to show you. So first of all, if you've ever been a Jehovah's Witness, or if you've ever been around Jehovah's Witnesses, you would have heard comments like this. Oh, how long have you been in the truth? Oh, I got the truth in 1975. The expression, in the truth. I kind of cringe when I hear it now. It just sounds kind of culty. But in all fairness, it was something that I said a lot when I was a witness. And on the outside, the Jehovah's Witness organization looks like an organization that really values the truth. In fact, let's look at this quote here from their book, Is This Life All There Is? It says, "It is obvious that the true God, who is himself the God of truth and who hates lies, will not look with favor on persons who cling to organizations that teach falsehood. And really, would you want to be even associated with a religion that has not been honest with you?" You're led to believe that they are a very honest and truthful religion, as we can see, though they're very quick to call others liars. They want you to trust everything they say, as we can see here from this yearbook. It says, in summary, the writing department insists on using only material that is accurate and truthful, even regarding seemingly insignificant details. As a result, the faithful and discreet slave can consistently supply spiritual food that brings honor to the God of truth, Jehovah. And from this 2011 Watchtower, it says, this organization has never disappointed us and always gives us an abundance of pure waters of truth. So they've never disappointed us. It's too bad we can't go back and ask all those who have died with these false promises being given to them. The ones who were promised things regarding 1914, regarding 1925, millions now living will never die, regarding 1975 and all the promises they made regarding that. We can't go back and ask these ones, were you not disappointed that you weren't given the promises that the organization gave to you? Of course they were. And it's crazy to say otherwise. But when you go back and ask the organization about these false promises, they're very quick to say, well, we're just like the apostles in Jesus' day. They also had false expectations. Yes, and that's true. They did have false expectations, but they didn't blab it all over the world, did they? They didn't preach this message. They didn't say, oh, God told us to preach this message. They didn't mislead people, and they didn't punish people for not going along with this preaching work that they were doing. Instead, they went to Jesus and asked him privately, were their false expectations right? And Jesus corrected them, and then they gave the right message. The JW org today is nothing like that. They just run ahead and preach whatever they think is right, insisting it's right, and punishing those who don't go along with it. And then they just say, oh, sorry, Actually, they don't even say sorry, so I take that back. They don't say sorry. They just say they were overeager, and then they just move on to the next one. Anyways, this video is going to show you it's going to show you their record of truth. We're going to take a look at actually just a fraction of the evidence of the lies, the misquotes, and the deception that has been going on from this organization. You might ask, well, why just a fraction of the evidence? Well, we don't have the time nor the stomach to sit through all of this. And yes, it is kind of painful to watch. I mean, this organization was very dear to me too at one time. And to actually sift through all the lies, I mean, it took me a long time to put this video together. There is so much evidence. And I'm not being facetious when I say that. There is just so much out there. I tried to condense it. I tried to make it, easy to watch. Anyways, let's get going. The first thing we're going to do is talk about what they said about 1914. It's not so much what they said about 1914. As we know, they were completely out to lunch with 1914. It's what they say they said about 1914 that we're going to focus in on. Let's have a look. Prior to 1914, the Watchtower claimed it correctly predicted the occurrences of 1914 and is held to consistent teachings regarding that date. Yet, what do we find? Until the 1930s, the Watchtower taught that the time of the end commenced in 1799. Jesus' presence commenced in 1874, and Jesus' heavenly rule in 1878. And let's take a look from the publications where I got that information from. From the Harp of God, see, it says there, the time of the end embraces a period from AD 1799. The time of the Lord's presence dates from 1874. And from studies in the scriptures, the time is at hand. The year AD 1878 clearly marks the time for the actual assuming of power as King of Kings to reign, and it's closely associated with the resurrection of his faithful and the beginning of the trouble and wrath upon the nations. And then we see further, what else did they say about 1914? Well, from the Watchtower, the 1894 July 15th, it says, but bear in mind that the end of 1914 is not the date for the beginning, but for the end of the time of trouble. Now look at what they say they said from the 2013 Watchtower. Decades before 1914, Jehovah's worshippers declared to the nations that the end of the appointed times of the nations would come in that year, and that the world would enter into an unequaled period of trouble. And then from a 1973 Awake, it says Jehovah's Witnesses pointed to the year 1914 decades in advance as marking the start of the conclusion of the system of things. It's one thing to be wrong about what you have to say, like, for them to say in 1894 that this is what we think is going to happen in 1914, but for them to go back in 1973 and say they said something different. They said it was going to be the start of the conclusion of the system of things, when clearly they said it was the end, and then to pat themselves on the back and say, see, we got it right. Yeah. That is a lie, and they are deliberately trying to mislead you. To me, this is a very important point, because witnesses are under the false belief that their organization got it right about 1914. I remember when I was a JW, I remember thinking to myself, they might be wrong about this or that, but at least they were right about 1914. They had predicted in advance what would happen in 1914, and it all came true. But the fact is, they were wrong. They just say they got it right, but clearly they got that wrong too. Anyways, now we're going to look at some examples of how they rewrote their own literature when the promises they made failed to materialize. So from the 1989 Watchtower here, we see what's underlined. It says, he was also laying a foundation for a work that would be completed in our 20th century. But when that no longer mathematically worked, they went ahead and changed it to say that he was also laying a foundation for a work that would be completed in our day. Now you may think, well, what's wrong with that? They had to change it. Well, yes, this is when they say they don't ever disappoint people. You know, this is their example of how they don't disappoint people. They just go ahead and change it to say something it never said in the first place. People who are new and who come along and read the new improved version have no idea what they had originally said. People like me remember, though. And this is what they seem to forget. And then we see here from another example of when they did this was how Russell changed the pyramid measurements by 41 inches to show that 1914 would be the beginning of the time of trouble. We see from the 1891 edition of Thy Kingdom Come, the pyramid measured 3,416 inches, which brought them down to the year 1874, which is what he wanted to show at that time. But when he no longer wanted to show that 1874 was the chosen date, he then said that the pyramid now measured 3,457 inches. This is from his 1911 version of this same book. And this then brought you down to the close of 1914. Completely dishonest. Then we can see here from what Rutherford's talks did. We know Rutherford was very famous for his talks, Millions Now Living Will Never Die. Yet in a 2010 February 15th Watchtower, they refer to these talks as Millions Now Living May Never Die. To be fair, it does appear that when the talks first came out, they were called Millions Now Living May Never Die. But they were only called that for about 5 weeks. And then for the next 7 years, the talks were called Millions Now Living Will Never Die. Plus, there was a book Rutherford had called Millions Now Living Will Never Die. There's a big difference between may never die and will never die. And to refer to the talks as the Millions Now Living May Never Die talks is really not being honest, is it? Because there's a big difference between may and will. And the talks were definitely not referred to as may never die. It's definitely giving a false impression to say that. Now let's take a look at what was said on an awake masthead for many years. So from January 1982 to October 1995, the masthead said there, if you notice the last sentence, most important, this magazine builds confidence in the Creator's promise of a peaceful and secure new world before the generation that saw the events of 1914 passes away. But when they became afraid that that 1914 generation was about to pass away, they quietly changed it in 1995 to say, that it was the Creator's promise of a peaceful and secure new world that is about to replace the present wicked, lawless system of things. One of the most common ways that the Watchtower Society misleads people is through the use of the ellipse when quoting their sources. That's the ... you will see in many of their publications. What's so weird about the way they use this ellipse is that they have actually alter the meaning entirely of what they're quoting from, so that the quote now says pretty much the exact opposite of what the person was saying who they're quoting from. So from the Trinity brochure, they're quoting from the Triune God. The first column there is what the Trinity brochure says. And it says, the New Testament writers give us no formal or formulated doctrine of the Trinity, no explicit teaching that in one God there are 3 co-equal divine persons, ... What's missing there from the actual quote is, but they do give us an elemental Trinitarianism, the data from which such a formal doctrine of the triune God may be formulated. Changes the meaning of the quote quite a bit there, doesn't it? And then the Trinity brochure quotes from Origin and Evolution of Religion. What's missing from their quote there is, the beginning of the doctrine of the Trinity appears already in John. All they quoted, though, was, to Jesus and Paul, the doctrine of the Trinity was apparently unknown, ... And again, what's missing is, at any rate, they say nothing about it. So we can see here that they actually changed the meaning entirely from what the quote said to pretty much the opposite. We also have examples of what they said about the cross. From the Reasoning book, it says there, I'll read from the second paragraph. The Greek word for cross, stauros, properly signified a stake, an upright pole or piece of paling on which anything might be hung or which might be used in impaling. A piece of ground, ... What's missing from that is, but a modification was introduced as the dominion and usages of Rome extended themselves through Greek-speaking countries. And then it further goes on to where they did quote, even amongst the Romans, the crux from which the word cross is derived appears to have been originally an upright pole. And then what's missing? And always remained the more prominent part, but from the time that it began to be used as an instrument of punishment, a transverse piece of wood was commonly added, not however always then. And then it further goes on to say there can be no doubt, however, that the later sort was the more common, and that about the period of the gospel age, crucifixion was usually accomplished by suspending the criminal on a cross piece of wood. And then it further goes on to say that, look at the last sentence there of that next paragraph, it was on a cross of this form, according to the general voice of tradition, that our Lord suffered, and that it was abolished by the time of Constantine. So the reasoning book selects what they want from that quote to make it appear to say what they wanted to say. What they don't want it to say, they just take out by putting a ... Now we're going to look at some dishonesties from the creation book. And believe me, there were many I could have chosen. I just chose these two to keep it short. We see here on page 15 of the creation book, they're quoting from the tortoise or the hare. What they took out is in black from the quote. So they took out Charles Darwin's brilliant theory of, and then they say evolution. And then it goes on to say, published in 1859, had a stunning impact on scientific and religious thought and forever changed man's perception of himself. Now that hallowed theory, and then this is what they decide to quote, is not only under attack by fundamentalist Christians, but is also being questioned by reputable scientists. Among paleontologists, scientists who study the fossil record, there is growing dissent from the prevailing view of Darwinism. What's interesting is, what are they questioning? They're not questioning evolution, these scientists. If you continue to read the quote, they're questioning how it came about, not whether it came about. Because if you go on to read, it says most of the debate will center on one key question. Does the 3 billion-year-old process of evolution creep at a steady pace? Or is it marked by long periods of inactivity punctuated by short bursts of rapid change? Darwin's widely accepted view that evolution proceeds steadily at a crawl favors the tortoise. But two paleontologists, Niles Eldridge of the American Museum of Natural History and Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard, are putting their bets on the hare. And from page 39 of the creation book, they're quoting here from Richard Dawkins, supposedly, from a 1976, The Selfish Gene. It says there, what they quoted was, this book should be read almost as though it were science fiction. But if you go on to read the quote, it further goes on to say, and what they didn't say, what the society didn't say is, it is designed to appeal to the imagination, but it is not science fiction. It is science, cliche or not. Stranger Than Fiction expresses exactly how I feel about the truth. The Trinity brochure and the creation book were so full of lies, deception, and misquotes that they were becoming an embarrassment to the organization. And so JW.org has actually pulled these publications and made them obsolete, so that it's very difficult to get a copy of them. But I have copies of them, and there's still evidence out there for people to see. This is what the organization wants. They don't want you to see the things that they have done. But unfortunately, we all have copies of these publications. So this is why I'm presenting this to you, so you can see for yourself what they've done. But if you think that the organization no longer does this, you'd be mistaken, because from a January 2015 Awake magazine, they were up to their old tricks again. Check it out. So we've got this Awake magazine up on the screen from 2015. I'm going to read on the left-hand side there. This is how the magazine originally had appeared. And the quote was, Rama Singh, professor of biology at Canada's McMaster's University, says, the opposition to evolution goes beyond religious fundamentalism and includes a great many people from educated sections of the population. And how did the gentleman here quoted respond when he was alerted to the matter? He says, JW has indeed misquoted me, and I do not agree with their article and its anti-evolution stand. In an open letter to Awake magazine editors, Singh made this request. So I'm asking you, first, to remove the misquotation from your article immediately, and second, print an unconditional apology for what I consider is a deliberate damaging action on your part to my reputation. So how did the organization respond? Well, we can see up on the screen here the updated version of this article. What they've actually done is removed his quote altogether and replaced it with the sentence where the arrow was pointing on the right side of the screen. It says, "The fact is, many educated people, including a number of scientists, question the validity of the theory." So we see that the organization refused to apologize for the error that they had committed here. Yes, they removed the quote. And they replaced it with a very generic one. You know, some educated people and some scientists believe this or that. Don't you find it odd that they couldn't even find one educated person and one scientist to back up what they're trying to say? That they just had to keep it generic like that? I find that really odd. And this is another thing that really bothers me about the organization. If you're trying to prove that Jesus died on a stake, if you're trying to prove your ideas on creation against evolution and your ideas against the Trinity, you shouldn't have to resort to misquotes to prove your claim. You know, once you start having to lie and deceive people, that makes me think, well, what have you got then? What have you got to prove that you're right? I'm not saying that they're wrong. I'm just saying it's a very poor case that they're trying to prove here by giving you false evidence and lies and misquotes. You know, it's like they don't have a leg to stand on, so they have to resort to these kinds of tactics to prove their point. And that makes me think, well, what is their point then? You know? And the damage was already done. You know, yes, they have retracted it. But the fact of the matter is, once you make these false statements, the majority of people who read their magazines are the people who read it for the first time, not 6 months later. So the damage is done, and they're aware of this. And when they print a retraction, they never say that they made a mistake. So even people reading it for the second time may not even remember, but it's still somewhere in their brain that, you know, this guy, this scientist, feels this way. Well, what did he have to say in further to this article? He was moved to write a commentary about it as well. Let's have a look. It says, "This commentary is in response to a recent misquotation of my work on evolution by Jehovah's Witnesses in an article on the origin of life in their magazine Awake. The goal of religion is to seek truth, to remove ignorance and fear, not to perpetuate myths and lies. As a man of religion, a creationist may have the need for God, and as a man of science, I may not. But we both should be on the same side when it comes to the pursuit of truth. Believers need truth as much as non-believers do." What an embarrassment, you know, what a bad witness they gave there to this gentleman. I'm sure they're never going to want to quote him again. It is universally accepted that Jerusalem fell in 587 BCE, except of course to J.W. Org. You see, if they humbly changed the date, it would mess up everything they'd said about 1914, because you need the 607 date to arrive at 1914. You know, many Jehovah's Witnesses have left when they discovered the truth about 607 and 587. There's been much written about it. There's much available for you if you want to do further research. For example, the book The Gentile Times Reconsidered by Carl Olaf Johnson has been written, explaining the entire situation and why the year should be 587 and not 607. There's been videos done. I believe JW Survey did an excellent video about it. And if you go to JW Facts, you see some awesome information there if you want to read more about it. And who can forget this now infamous video clip of Stephen Lett talking about pedophiles within the organization on a JW Broadcasting episode.
Another way we can contribute to the oneness, rejecting false stories that are designed to separate us from Jehovah's organization. As an example, think about the apostate-driven lies and dishonesties that Jehovah's organization is permissive toward pedophiles. I mean, that is ridiculous, isn't it? If anybody takes action against someone who would threaten our young ones and takes action to protect our young ones, it's Jehovah's organization. We reject outright such lies.
Yet when a different governing body member, Jeffrey Jackson, was on the stand during the Royal Australian Commission, he agreed that indeed there was a problem with pedophiles within the organization and that it wasn't apostate-driven lies. So we see that the organization knew about this all along and only admits it when they're put on a witness stand and have to testify.
Do you accept that the Jehovah's Witness organization has a problem with child abuse amongst its members?
I accept that child abuse is a problem right throughout the community, and it's something that we've had to deal with as well.
And would you disagree then with anyone who said that the efforts to highlight and deal with child sexual abuse in the Jehovah's Witness Church is engaging in apostate lies?
I guess that's a broad question, because sometimes those who make these accusations make many other accusations as well. But let me assure you, the person making the accusation is not the main thing. The main thing is there some basis to the accusation? And if there is some way that we can improve, the governing body is always interested in seeing how we can refine our policies.
Then we have the lies told by the branch coordinator, Brother O'Brien, who, when he was put on the stand, was trying to prevent Jeffrey Jackson from having to testify at the Royal Australian Commission. And he repeatedly was telling the story that Jeffrey Jackson was nothing more than a translator to the organization, that he had no authority whatsoever, completely hiding the fact that he was a member of the governing body, and he knowingly and willingly hid this information. But the Australian Commission figured this out, as you'll see here.
So, Brian, you've given evidence that you gave instructions to counsel on the point of Mr. Jackson not being able to assist and his activities being with relation to translations. And I, as a matter of fairness, must put to you that those instructions you gave were false, were they not?
No, I don't believe so. Mr. Jackson does oversee the translation work, but as part of the writing committee member, which he is one of the governing body members on that committee. So,
and I suggest to you, I put to you, that when you gave those instructions, you knew them to be false.
No, I disagree.
And by giving those instructions, you sought to mislead the Royal Commission to protect Mr. Jackson from any potential summons to appear.
No, I disagree. I think the reason we asked consideration to be shown to Mr. Jackson was the grave situation of his father, the very reason he's in Australia.
Yes, well, and in relation to that, in view of what I've put to you, perhaps you can answer this. How are we to know if what you say about Mr. Jackson's compassionate circumstances is in fact true?
We could provide an affidavit if you wish. We could provide doctors' reports on his father, whatever the Royal Commission would like. I'm sure we can arrange for that.
How long has he been in Australia?
I'm not sure, Your Honour, but I think maybe a week or two, a couple of weeks perhaps.
Now we're going to look at two examples of plagiarism that has been going on within the Society's publications. We see here a Watchtower cover illegally stealing a 1981 Johnny Walker ad. And then, you may remember this picture from the You Can Live Forever in Paradise on Earth book. But it turns out that the girl that where they copyright infringed a German magazine cover with turned out to be somebody who had been a Playboy playmate. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I just thought it was interesting, a little tidbit of information. This here is probably one of the bigger lies that the organization has told, and it involves the fact that JW.org had joined the United Nations as a non-governmental organization for 10 years. A lot of people have left the organization when they found this out. And if you want to read some of the emails that went back and forth between the organization and the newspaper that had printed the story, you can see it on the JW Facts website. But take a look here, and if you just Wikipedia it, this is what I've got up on the screen here. I'll read what's in red there. It says, on October 8th, 2001, an article was published in the British Guardian newspaper questioning the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society's registration as a non-governmental organization, an NGO, with the United Nations. Within days of the article's publication, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society submitted a formal request for disassociation. And they claimed it was to access their facilities. Or I think they said it was a library card is what they said they needed. However, when the Watchtower Society sought NGO association, the organization agreed to meet criteria for association, including support and respect of the principles of the Charter of the United Nations, acknowledging that the purpose of membership is to promote knowledge of the principles and activities of the United Nations. It's so disgraceful what happened here. I mean, apparently every year for each of those 10 years, the organization had to, I don't know if it was a matter of reapplying for to be a member, but they had to say, yes, we want to continue to be a member. And there was a form they had to fill out each and every year. And each and every time they agreed to the criteria of the United Nations, to support the United Nations. Don't you find this unbelievable? After all the things that they have said about the United Nations being the eighth beast or whatever from Revelation. I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous. And when I found this out, I was appalled. I should also add that the organization never had to apply to become members of the United Nations to get a library card. You don't need to be a member to access their library. So their excuse in saying that was an obvious lie. The next lie I want to focus in on is what Jeffrey Jackson said on the stand regarding corporal punishment.
Does your church accept corporal punishment of children?
Our church accepts the family arrangement and expects that parents have the responsibility to discipline and raise their children.
That doesn't answer my question. Do you accept corporal punishment?
In our literature, I think you'll see time and time again, we've endeavoured to explain that here, discipline is referring to more a mental point of view.
I regret to tell you, you're still not answering my question. Do you accept corporal punishment?
No.
You don't?
Not personally, no. And not as an organisation. We don't encourage it.
But do you prohibit it?
Our literature has pointed out that the true way to discipline children is by educating them, not giving corporal punishment.
We can see that Jeffrey Jackson was lying here because if we just take a look at the Family Life book from 1978, it says there that a spanking may be a lifesaver to a child. And then they quote the scripture there from Proverbs about not holding back discipline from the mere boy. In case you beat him with the rod, he will not die, and so forth. And I know that this is what happened because I lived through the spanking era. I got spanked many a time at the meetings because I had a hard time paying attention. You know, you're sitting there through this boring talks as a kid. You have no idea what they're talking about. And I got spanked many a time, as did all the other kids. What the judge was trying to highlight, which is interesting, was that the witnesses have altered the meanings of scriptures to fit contemporary circumstances. So when this verse in Proverbs was written in Bible times, perhaps it did mean a physical rod where you would hit a child. But the way things have morphed into the way we live today under contemporary standards, people are shocked when you spank a child. So they've now sort of taken the meaning of that scripture to mean, well, discipline doesn't have to mean a physical rod. There's other ways to discipline children. But Jeffrey Jackson didn't want to admit that, because if he's going to admit that you could change the scriptures to fit contemporary circumstances, then he's going to have to admit that you could change other scriptures regarding the raping of a child, for example, to fit contemporary circumstances. The way things happen today and the way things should be done today should not necessarily be done the way they were in Bible times. But he didn't want to admit that. Okay, I'm going to have to stop there. There's actually more things that I wanted to show you, but the show is just going to be going into overtime. And I think what I'll do instead is just do a quick review of some of the things that we looked at today. And I found this really good song that it's called It's Impossible for God to Lie. It's a song that I remember singing many a time when I was a JW. And I'm sure you'll understand why I chose this song. So enjoy.
Our God promised Abraham he would be blessed, for Abraham proved himself true under test. This blessing he long foresaw by his faith's eye. He knew it's impossible for God to
Think about the apostate-driven lies and dishonesties that Jehovah's organization is permissive toward pedophiles.
So we all attacks on our faith can defy. We know it's impossible.
Do you accept corporal punishment?
No.
You don't?
Not personally, no. And not as an organization, we don't encourage it.
Okay, I got a little bit carried away there with my Movie Maker program and with another little program I have called Audacity. I was having a good time. I hope you enjoyed that little cartoon there at the end there. That was done by a friend of mine, Christian Freedom. The look on Tony Morris's face there as his pants are on fire from all the lies he's told is priceless. Anyways, to be a bit more serious now, we can see that there's just an overwhelming amount of lies and deception that has been done by the Watchtower Society. You know, I mean, these things were not done accidentally. They weren't done because they were overeager. These were deliberate attempts to deceive people. So let's go back and take a look at that quote from the Is This Life All There Is book. It says, "Knowing these things, what will you do? It is obvious that the true God, who is himself the God of truth and who hates lies, will not look with favor on persons who cling to organizations that teach falsehood. And really, would you want to be even associated with a religion that has not been honest with you? Or one that doesn't apologize for any of the mistakes that they do make?" Those are questions that really only you can answer. You have to do what's best for you. So I hope you enjoyed this show. And if you like the video, then like it. And I hope to see you again next time. Bye.
On to